You are Locked On Vikings, your daily Minnesota Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Well, hello there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Locked On Vikings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Rock Auto. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Visit rockauto.com and let them know that Locked On sent you. As always, I'm your host, your pal, and the kid you copied off in math class. My name is Luke Braun. You can find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL, and the show's on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. And as of this week, this show is on YouTube. So head on over to YouTube, search up Locked On Vikings, find that channel, subscribe to it. If you're too lazy to do all that, there's a link in the show notes for you. Come check us out on YouTube. You can see the light slowly leave my eyes as the season wears on. And we are very close to the season. We have our very last Twitter Tuesday today before the season actually begins. I've got a mailbag chock full of questions here, so we are going to get into it. The only real news is probably more week one news. We'll talk about it obviously a little more as we get into previewing the Bengals game later in the week. But what was going to be a revenge game, I guess, for former Viking Trey Waynes, who's with Cincinnati now, he's not going to play. He's still dealing with some injury things. So he's not going to be there for week one, which means that their cornerback group is like Eli Apple and Chidobe Awuzie and like Darius Phillips. And it's like this really bleak cornerback group to run all the way up immediately against Adam Thielen and Justin Jefferson, which feels like a pretty good matchup. There was a question in the mailbag about what my favorite mismatches are. That certainly is one of them. But we'll talk about all that other stuff about like Cincinnati specifically later in the week when we actually get to previewing that game. So first, I am going to start with the Twitter questions, I guess. Again, you can send me a Twitter question whenever you want. You can DM it to me at Locked On Vikings or at Luke Braun NFL. There's a Google form in the show notes as well. If you'd rather do that, you can send an email as well to lockedonvikingspodcast@gmail.com. The first one that I'm going to answer here comes from Zach McDermott, who says, which perceived playoff teams in the NFC do we match up best and worst against? So I thought about this, and I think while Dan Quinn is in Dallas, I really like the way that matches up. The Vikings' best plays are cover three beaters, and Dan Quinn runs cover three almost like entirely. And so does Pete Carroll. So like Cowboys, Seahawks, those kinds of teams, and anybody running a Pete Carroll disciple. I really like those matchups. And basically, and I won't get too into the nitty gritty of it, but the way the reads work, the way the progressions work, they're all kind of designed in an era where Pete Carroll's cover three was like in fashion. Think about what Mike Zimmer was concocting, or, what Gary Kubiak was concocting in 2015 with those Broncos. What were the defenses he was running into? What were those? And those kind of wide zone concepts, or when, McVay and Shanahan were really coming of age kind of in the mid 2010s and really coming out as really big time play callers. What defenses were they designing plays against? What was everywhere in the league? So everybody who's still running that, our defense is kind of designed against it. In terms of worst matchups, it's the other ones. It's the Vic Fangio ones. I don't like the way we match up against the Bears. I wouldn't call them a playoff team. For playoff teams, I would say like the Rams. Even though the Vikings are running a little bit more of that 3-4 kind of Vic Fangio stuff this year, it seems like, which will make them, I guess, a little better against like McVay's Rams. They still have good wide receivers. They still have Matt Stafford. They still have a defense in, whatever the shadow of Brandon Staley is, that is kind of designed to beat our offense. So I don't like the Rams, and I do like the Cowboys and Seahawks matchups. Next one comes from Jacob Smith, who says, how many catches do you expect for Westbrook, Osborn, and ISM over the course of the year? I don't know if Westbrook or Osborn will be wide receiver 3. If I had to guess, I would guess Osborn, because, he earned it over camp, and Westbrook basically didn't practice, right? So you'd be giving it to D.D. Westbrook based off only reputation, and that reputation is about being as good as B.C. Johnson. So I don't know if that reputation really anoints him the job. So I would say, I don't know, a couple of catches a game. In terms of like ISM, I don't know. He's the 5th guy on the roster, so he's going to have really, really limited work. But those guys get into the rotation every once in a while. I don't know. Whatever the over-under is, I would probably call the under. But I mean, as a trio, they'll just be the other guys that spell Thielen and Jefferson when they get tired. Next one comes from Chris, who says, how would you attempt to organize a bunny version of the Puppy Bowl? Okay, so obviously the Puppy Bowl, the Super Bowl thing. For one, bunnies are a lot more like cats than they are like dogs. Like you can't just put them into a room with a whole bunch of other bunnies and expect them to get along. They're like fight and bite and do all kinds of crazy stuff. So it would have to be more like a bunny Olympics where they're all kept separate and then somehow motivated to go from one place to the next, probably with some sort of food. So it would be more like a sprinting event. I don't know if people would want to watch that as much as the Puppy Bowl, though. And I don't think you could simulate football without the bunnies just destroying each other. They're violent little things. Here it is. Scholar or whatever says, what do you see as the biggest mismatches, Min versus Sin? Again, I'm not going to go way deep in on this, but I think the Vikings receivers versus the Bengals corners is a big mismatch. And I think the Vikings defensive line versus the Bengals offensive line, especially on the interior, is a huge mismatch. Their interior is really patchwork. They have Quentin Spain, who's old. They have Xavier, who is kind of never really been that good. Their center's coming off of surgery. It's a really patchwork group versus like Michael Pearson, Dalvin Tomlinson, who've been feasting all preseason. I really like that. One of my favorite matchups, it's not a mismatch at all, is DJ Wanham probably as the starting and rushing against their left tackle, Jonah Williams. Jonah Williams has issues with length, and DJ Wanham is a lengthy pass rusher. He's swims and stuff. He's like a tall, long guy. He hasn't been that good at using it in his rookie year. I want to see that improve, and I haven't really seen one way or another. Haven't really paid attention to it in the preseason, so I don't know. But if he can use his length, it should work against Jonah Williams. It's a really good test. But similarly, the Vikings interior is going to get a good test against Larry Ogunjobi and DJ Reader of the Bengals. Those are a couple of powerful guys, especially Reader. He's a powerful guy. So you got kind of power against like Garrett Bradbury on the interior and 2 tackles. That's going to be interesting. NT29 says, you think Xavier Woods will thrive playing alongside Harrison Smith, just like Harrison Sendejo thrived when they played with him? Look, yeah, I think Harrison Sendejo were kind of good in their own right, and Sendejo, I think, was still okay in other schemes. But I think, I don't know if that's necessarily because of Harrison Smith. I mean, it helps to have a safety make the right calls all the time, right? Because then you're told to be in the right place, and if you're in the right place and you know your assignments generally, which is not that high a bar for an NFL player, then yeah, sure, you can be in the right place, you can make some plays right there. I think Xavier Woods, I don't know, returns out of camp, they're really, really optimistic about him. We'll see if he actually plays well and stuff, but it seems like he's playing fairly fast enough, and he's just got to make his tackles. Taryn Schuster asks, better odds for Kirk against the Bengals, more touchdowns or more interceptions? I mean, you just heard what I said about the cornerbacks. It's touchdowns. The safeties in Cincinnati are really good. But again, too many things about Cincy. We'll talk about Cincy later. Vikings disappointment enthusiast says, are Vikings capable of effectively shadowing a wide receiver 1 with their current roster? No. I don't think they should shadow at all. I don't think they have a cornerback with the chops to do that. I don't think Patrick Peterson can do that like he used to. Bashaud Breeland's never been able to. Cameron Dantzler hasn't been good enough this preseason. I don't think they have a guy to shadow. I don't think you should shadow. I don't think you have to shadow against a wide receiver 1. Unless you've got the dog to do it, you should bracket the wide receiver 1. You should do coverages that, roll his way. You can kind of manipulate the spacing that way and take him out of the game plan schematically instead of trying to just ask a dude to 1v1 him. That's, I think, a much better way to handle a wide receiver 1, even if you do have a cornerback sometimes that can do it. Sometimes you want to use that cornerback on something else instead of just stapling him to their best guy all day. So I got a lot more questions that I want to get into, but first let me talk to you about Grambling. BetOnline is your one-stop shop for all things sports gambling. It is the best spot for all pro and college football action this coming season. You can get all of the updated odds, props, and all their contests. They got a couple of really cool ones. They have online's biggest $500,000 NFL mega contest and the world's largest $200,000 NFL Survivor contest. Open now at BetOnline. You can head to the website, use your mobile device to sign up today, and receive your 100% welcome bonus. So you can also take advantage of their opening day super promo. Make a bet on the Thursday, September 9th season opener between the Super Bowl champion Bucks and the Dallas Cowboys. And if you lose, your wager will be refunded up to $25 for new customers only when entering promo code NFL100 when you sign up. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet all of your favorite sports, from football, basketball, boxing, right to your favorite Vegas casino games. Don't wait, and take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts. Okay, continuing on with this Twitter Tuesday mailbag here on the Locked On Vikings podcast. The next one is an older one that I let slip through the cracks over August that I really want to get to. It's from Quinn Schoenfelder, who asks, it seems the teams have figured out our play action bootlegs, and they now send the defensive end right at Kirk. Is the counter to that having the TE on the play action side slide across and block the end? I believe that would make it split zone. Seems like the obvious evolution in the scheme, and I hope the Vikings employ it like the Rams have in the past. So the Vikings have employed this. They have gotten touchdowns off this. If you look up CJ Ham's touchdowns, receiving touchdowns, they've done this. This is a red zone concept that they do. So you're definitely onto something, and the Vikings probably agree with you. However, I think their plan for that this year, and I don't love it, is essentially to have either a jet motion guy coming across and being, instead of blocking the defensive end, being an outlet receiver. And so you put the defensive end now in conflict. Either he has to back off and cover that receiver and now, no pressure. Or if he comes at the quarterback, you throw it over the top of him and you get the ball in, say, KJ Osborn's hands. Or you can even have that guy be Dalvin Cook, get the ball in Dalvin Cook's hands in space. And now it has become kind of a swing pass or a weird screen play. And that's your floor of the play. So that's part of it. Sometimes that's a tight end and stuff too. And I think Tyler Conklin after the catch is pretty good. So I feel okay about that at least. However, it's kind of easy to cover that, right? If you're in man coverage, somebody's probably already responsible for that guy. So the defensive end can clearly go in to attack the quarterback. And then you're not as protected against, it kind of falls apart to man coverage. So I don't love that plan, but it seems like that's what theirs is. But the idea of running, they run split zone plenty, and faking off of split zone is absolutely all over the playbook. So you're totally on to something there. Terry Verichak says, do you guys think the Vikings have Joseph on a short leash? Yes. Greg Joseph, the kicker. Yes. I still sometimes I'm like, Linval Joseph, why would it? No, he has been on the team for 2 years. Yeah, Greg Joseph, I think, is on a short leash. He missed a lot of kicks in the preseason. He missed a lot of kicks in camp. He struggled unbelievably, horribly over 50 yards. And I think if that continues, then they go get another kicker. And I think, honestly, there's not a lot stopping them from getting other kickers. Right now, the best guy out there is like Joey Sly, or a guy that the Chargers cut, which has some really bad juju to it in Michael Badgley. And I don't even, is he even healthy? I don't know. Anyways, the pickings are kind of slim out there. There's not anybody that's particularly exciting. So maybe they're just waiting for somebody to get cut that they can reclaim or something like that. Or maybe they just didn't like any of the kickers out there. If somebody else comes around, they'll do it. But I do think Greg Joseph is on a bit of a short leash. Yeah. Relim Nod Narb says, which current or former Viking seems like a bunny guy? Big bunny energy. Gosh, a bunny, like a bunny energy, like a person who's because bunnies are like cats where they kind of don't care about you. So I don't know who's aloof like that. Greg Joseph, honestly, seems really aloof. Apparently, the whole deal, I don't know if any of you saw this with Chris Thomason on Twitter. During training camp, he missed a kick wide left, and there was a typo in one of the tweets about it that said Greg Joseph wife left, and everybody laughed at it. And Sam Ekstrom, who used to host the show, showed that tweet to him, and he was just deadpan, nothing. So it seems like that seems like some bunny energy. Speaking of those little rascals, let me talk to you about your car. Yeah, that makes sense. Rock Auto is a great place to find everything you could possibly need for your car. If you're a do-it-yourself or you're a black thumb and you need gears and gaskets and valves and whatever. You can find just about anything you can imagine at Rock Auto. It is an aggregator for all the car parts you could ever possibly need. And also, regular supplies, motor oil, jumper cables, windshield wiper fluid, that kind of stuff. If you enter your make, your year, and your model of your car, it'll also sort through all the stuff that isn't compatible with your car and give you a bunch of options that are. So it can take that part of the research out of it for you. And it's all a discount because it's not a retail brick and mortar auto joint. They're just an aggregator. They're letting you purchase directly from the manufacturer, and you get to save a buck as opposed to, whatever auto parts shop around the corner that's going to check in the back and then tell you that they can get it shipped out in 2 weeks and charge you for the shipping and all that. Don't do any of that stuff. Just go straight to rockauto.com. And at checkout, there's a how you heard about us section. Make sure you let them know in that Locked On sent you, because if you don't, I will arm the rabbits and I will not regret it. Rock Auto, amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. Now, let me also ask you if this sounds familiar. You got one device that lets you catch the game live, another that lets you stream your favorite shows, you're watching sports highlights on your phone, and you've got your neighbor's best friend's login that you're stealing unbeknownst to them. Maybe your ex's login for all that good stuff. Well, let me tell you about a simple way to get all that stuff consolidated and get rid of all that hassle. You can finally get your TV together. It's called DirecTV Stream, and it brings your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before. So you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. That means no more juggling remotes, no need to buy another device ever again. And the best part, no annual contracts. So get rid of the clutter and the confusion and get your TV together with DirecTV Stream. You can learn more at directtv.com. It's directtv.com. Compatible device required. Content varies by package. All right, let's get into the Google Doc here. A couple from the Google Doc. First one comes from George, who says, any last-minute additions to help this roster? I'm still hoping a competent QB2 that does more than help Kirk prepare, or a practice squad kicker in the event there is a meltdown. I love the idea of a practice squad kicker to come and get in and get used to the facility and stuff, so you're not scrambling, right, and kind of make that choice ahead of time. Because, again, I do think the kicker's on a short leash. I don't know who that would be. Probably some guy that I've never heard of, because that's how these things tend to go. But I don't think a QB2 is coming. I think Mannion's the QB2. I think they just feel better about that. And I feel better about Mannion than I would have about Browning. I don't feel great about it, but I don't know. He could limp you through a single game if there's a COVID protocol problem, right? That, and hand off a lot. And it can be one of those kinds of games. Whereas if you have Browning or Kellen Mond out there, and I would imagine Kellen Mond, not ready yet, right? Can't operate the offense quite yet. Couldn't do it in the preseason. He's a rookie. That's totally understandable. But I wouldn't be surprised if the Vikings did kind of feel that hey, look, halfway through the season, Kellen Mond might be ready to be the backup quarterback. And we can kind of dispense with all of this nonsense. And maybe they do expect more from him than I do. And that would be nice. The next one comes from Nolan, who says, what made you get into making podcasts? So my story of making podcasts, I got this show in December of 2018. And really funny, my very, very first show, I kind of introduced myself and I said, okay, my first topic is going to be why I don't necessarily think the problems with the Vikings offense in 2018 are John DeFilippo's fault. And I actually caped for John DeFilippo, and the day it came out, before it released, he was fired. That was my very first take on Locked On Vikings. But going further back than that, so I've been a Vikings fan my whole life, very zealous Vikings fan, you might be able to tell. And I decided I wanted to start writing articles after the 2015 season. 2015 season really emboldened me. I really was excited about the Vikings. I had lots of thoughts to share. I wanted to write some articles. So I joined a website called Purple PTSD, which is run by a guy named Joe Johnson, who has passed away recently, actually. Rest his soul. And he kind of gave me the platform to play and learn, and I wrote for him for 2 years, just kind of learning how to write and how to be a writer. I had no experience in it. And from that, I was contacted by Locked On after 2018, midway through the 2018 season. They needed to fill the vacancy for their Vikings podcast. And so he asked me to do it, and I did it from there. But it started with writing, and it really started with Teddy Bridgewater's press conference after Blair Walsh missed that field goal in the 2015 playoffs. That was where it started, because he basically kind of talked about look, time is short, life's short, and you got to take every opportunity you can. And I was like, yeah, life is short, and I want to do this. I'm going to go ahead and go out and do it. That's always the origin story, I guess. So you can thank Teddy Bridgewater for my stupid takes. The next one comes from Joe Green, who says, what realistically would you like analytics or advanced stats to help shed a light on? And he says he thinks that I've answered this before. I think I answered this one like a while ago, but I'm more than happy to answer again. So I love this question because here's what I want to see from analytics, and I love the forward-thinking nature of it. I want to see less about the result of a play and more about the process of a play. I think that the analytics writings that I've seen lately have been a lot of different permutations of the same general idea, which is let's take how much EPA these plays get and how much EPA those plays get, find some way to assign credit about that and come up with conclusions, right? And I don't really, or, WAR or DVOA or whatever metric they want to be using. That is not as compelling to me. What I want to see is more about the process of a play. How often do teams line up in particular formations? And I don't just mean how often do they come out in 11 personnel. Warren Sharp's been tracking that for years. I mean, how often do they come out when they're in two tight ends? How often are both of those tight ends in tight? How often are they stacked to one side, or are they on opposite sides of the formation? How often do teams come out in balanced or unbalanced formations? That kind of stuff. And you can do that with the player tracking data. And I think you can get more interesting insights like team to team there about kind of whose tendencies are what. And also you're kind of simulating and automating things that teams actually do. And I have it on decent authority that analytics people have done this, but they've given it to the teams instead of the public, which I guess we have to be fine with. But that's the kind of thing that I would like to see. I want to see more about the spacing. And I think the player tracking data is the way to do that. But right now we're still kind of trying to use the player tracking data as a way to simulate and approximate the results of a play instead of looking at the process of the play. Eric DeRed says, can you talk about the tight formation, what it is, and how the Vikings can use it this year? I don't know if this is ironic because I talk about the tight formation like every other show, but again, happy to do it again. So the tight formation is a defensive alignment, a defensive front. So if you imagine the 4 defensive linemen and call it the 3 linebackers, and we'll say this is out of base. Oh, no, this is a nickel thing. So 4 and 2 linebackers, right? So usually you have, if you look at guys who are in between the tackles, draw a line at the outside shoulder of each offensive tackle, how many people are inside that box? You usually would have the 2 defensive tackles easily, right? The nose and the 3 tech, and then the 2 linebackers usually line up in those. And then the 2 edge rushers are outside the tackles, and they're rushing from, wider. The tight front basically scoots both of those defensive tackles over and throws one of the defensive ends inside the tackle's shoulder now. And the advantage of that is you now have 5 people on the inside of the tackles. And if you think about it, there's only 4 gaps between the offensive linemen, at 5 if there's a tight end. So you've basically got those gaps handled. And it is extremely difficult to run up the middle against that, especially if those guys are, Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson and Eric Kendricks. Really difficult to run up the middle against it. And so most offensive plays aren't just close your eyes and run up the middle, right? Most of the time, if you're going to have a run up the middle, there is an alert, or there is, the running back will have leeway to do something else, to bounce it outside, or to check into a pass play the quarterback might be able to. Or check into something to the outside. So basically most offenses will say, hey, if you are going to load up the middle like that, we'll go to the outside. And the tight front's philosophy basically says, sure, we'll take that. Our guys will rally, and those plays take longer to develop, so we'll take that. That's the idea of the tight front, and the Vikings have run the tight front. This is a Vic Fangio thing, Brandon Staley, Patrick Graham, all these other big defensive minds. The Vikings are starting to kind of steal those concepts, and it seems like they're going to run it quite a bit, and that kind of helps explain why they have Michael Pierce and Dalvin Tomlinson instead of a more traditional penetrating 3 technique, a Sheldon Richardson type, and why they're going to rotate that guy instead of, it's kind of why they're going like double nose is the way that I have described it. I will see you all tomorrow. Tomorrow will be the last day of what I'm going to call off-season content, and then we get into the rigid schedule of in-season stuff, starting with Crossover Thursday, where we will cross over with Jake and James over at Locked On Bengals, and then on Friday, we'll start doing the bold prediction and season and game preview and all of that stuff. So get your bold predictions ready for the Friday show. I want to hear your spiciest takes. You can always find me on Twitter at Luke Braun NFL. Show's on Twitter at Locked On Vikings. You can also find the Locked On Bets podcast and get your Grambles straight with your boy Q and Lee Sterling. They get you set up over there. That is a daily gambling podcast. I will see you all tomorrow. And as always, Skull.